Today, you are going to learn how to make beer. In the next few minutes, we're going to be showing you one of the simplest and cheapest ways to start homebrewing. First, we're going to need to get some equipment together, a lot of which you're probably already going to have at home.
We'll be using a stove or propane burner, a pot that holds 3 or more gallons, a long stirring spoon, ideally stainless steel or plastic, avoid wooden spoons, a strainer, a cooking or candy thermometer, aluminum or tin foil, a timer, scissors, an unscented cleanser of some sort, OxyClean works, enough plastic soda bottles and caps for 3 gallons of beer, kitchen scale, and some ice.
There's going to be a few things that you'll need to buy. We always recommend visiting your local homebrew shop, but if you don't have one nearby, try checking online or visiting your local hardware store.
These include 5-gallon food-grade bucket, this will be our fermenter, no-rinse sanitizer, a paint strainer bag to hold our grains, 6 feet of food-grade vinyl tubing, and a bottling wand, which is used to control the flow of beer when we're filling bottles.
Now that we have the tools to make beer, it's time for the fun part, the recipe. In this video, we'll be making an amber ale. This is a simple recipe for beginners that makes for a deliciously malty beer with a nice prominent hoppiness. Here's what we'll need.
2 pounds Pilsner dry malt extract, 1.5 pounds of pale dry malt extract, 11 ounces of Crystal 80 malt, 11 ounces of Crystal 40 malt, 1 ounce of nugget hops, a 1/2 ounce of Amarillo hops, a 1/2 ounce of East Kent Goldings hops, 1 packet of dry ale yeast, we're using Lallemand Nottingham yeast, 2.5 ounces of corn sugar, also known as dextrose, and water. Use distilled, filtered, or bottled water, since water sources with chlorine can add unwanted flavors to our beer. The grains will need to be milled to crack open the outer husks. Ask the homebrew shop you purchased the ingredients from to mill the grains for you.
You can find the link to this recipe and hundreds of other beer recipes in the video description below. It's always a good idea to have a print copy of your recipe on brew day. We're going to start by steeping some of our specialty grains, which will add some color and some flavor and aroma to our beer.
Let's bring 2.5 gallons of water to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. While the water is heating, pour the milled grains into the paint strainer bag and tie off the end. We'll leave a bit of space in the bag to allow the grains to expand once they're wet. When the thermometer reads 160 degrees Fahrenheit, turn off the heat and dunk in the grain bag, just like a giant tea bag. Be sure that the grains get completely wet and saturated, and then set your timer for 30 minutes.
Since we want to keep our temperature at about 160 degrees Fahrenheit, we'll cover it to retain the heat. And while we're waiting on that to steep, we'll go ahead and weigh out our hop additions.
We highly recommend using a food scale to get exact measurements. If you don't have one, see if the shop you're buying the ingredients from can weigh them for you. I like to put each hop addition in its own cup so they're ready to dump in accordance to the recipe's schedule. Our recipe has 3 hop additions. Now that our steep is done, remove the grain bag and let it drip. If the bag is cool enough, you can even give it a squeeze to get any last drops of liquid out of there. Discard the grains. They're great for compost, or check out any of our recipes on spent grain on homebrewersassociation.org. Next, we're going to take our malt extracts and add them to the kettle. It's best to gradually add extracts and stir them in to prevent it from collecting on the bottom of the pot. Stir thoroughly until the extract is totally dissolved. Use your spoon to make sure none has collected on the bottom of the pot.
What we just made is the basis for our wort. Wort is the term for beer before it's fermented. The yeast will convert our sugars into alcohol, creating beer.
Now, we'll turn the heat back on to medium-high and bring the wort to a boil. Be careful as the wort approaches boil, as it is prone to foaming up. If you do see lots of foam starting to build up, you can use a fan or a spray bottle of water to keep it at bay. Or if you have a homebrew shop nearby, buy some anti-foam drops. Once our wort has reached a boil and rolled for a few minutes, set your timer for 60 minutes and add in your first hop addition. The standard homebrew recipe lists hop addition and the time from the end of the boil. So since we are doing a 60-minute boil, We will add our 60-minute hops first.
The hops we add earlier in the boil will impart more bitterness into our beer, while the later additions will add more flavor and aroma.
Adding in your hops can also cause the wort to foam up and out of the pot. Use your method of choice to keep the foam at bay.
Our next hop addition isn't added until the very end of the boil. So during this downtime, we can take the opportunity to be sure that all of the equipment we need is cleaned and sanitized. Sanitization is a crucial step in ensuring that we don't spoil our beer by bacteria that could cling to the equipment. But we can't sanitize until everything is clean.
We'll start by washing any dirty equipment with unscented soap and water, ensuring there's no debris sticking to the equipment. Rinse thoroughly. With everything clean, we'll be using the fermenter bucket as our sanitation basin. Fill the bucket up halfway and add in your no-rinse sanitizer per the instructions. Then, sanitize a long piece of foil that we'll put on the counter and place our other sanitized equipment on until we use them. Then, dunk in the rest of the equipment into the bucket for a few seconds, let them drip a bit, and then lay them on the sanitized foil. We'll need to sanitize the thermometer, the strainer, our spoon, scissors, the yeast packet, and the fermenter bucket.
Don't worry about sanitizing equipment that comes into contact with the wort before or during the boil. The boil process itself is a form of sanitization.
Now that the 60-minute boil is complete, shut off the heat and add in the last 2 hop additions at the same time. We're going to let these hops steep for 15 minutes to get all that lovely hop flavor and aroma.
Now that the hop steep is over, we'll need to chill our wort down cool enough to pitch the yeast. If we pitch the yeast when it's too hot, we'll kill the little guys. So we'll aim for somewhere between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. There are many ways to chill beer, but today we'll simply be using water and ice.
Start by submerging the kettle in a sink or basin of cold water. Draining out the warm water and replacing with cool water can help speed up the process. Then, we'll add some ice to the sink to cool it down more. Chilling can take some time, so be patient. Once the temperature drops below 80 degrees Fahrenheit, pour the wort through the sanitized strainer to catch any sediment as it goes into the fermenter bucket. Once in the bucket, top off the fermenter to 3 gallons using cold water. This will also help further chill the beer. If your bucket doesn't have volume markers, measure out gallon increments prior to using it.
With our chilled wort in the fermenter, we're now ready to add the most important ingredient, yeast. Yeast is what makes beer come to life, converting fermentable sugars into alcohol and CO2. For this recipe, we're going to be using dry yeast, but brewer's yeast is also available in liquid form.
Using sanitized scissors, open the yeast packet and dump the entirety of the contents into the fermenter. Next, we'll take a piece of sanitized foil large enough to cover the top of the bucket. Crimp it over the top of the fermenter completely. This will keep out dust and bacteria, while allowing CO2 to escape.
If we use an airtight lid, the pressure of the CO2 could eventually build up in the fermenter and may even cause a messy explosion. Now, we need to find a place for the fermenter to live for the next few weeks while the yeast goes to work. Ideally, the location has a stable temperature in the preferred range as indicated on the back of the yeast packet.
For this recipe, we're using a dry yeast, which calls for a temperature in the 64 to 82 degree Fahrenheit range. My closet stays within this range, so I'll let it bubble away in there. If possible, aim for an ambient temperature on the lower side, since fermentation activity will raise the temperature of the wort. You will notice foaming and bubbling activity in the fermenter a day or 2 after adding the yeast. A few days after that, the activity will slow down, but the fermentation continues.
For our amber ale, we'll leave it in the closet for about 2 to 3 weeks to ensure that fermentation is complete. While fermentation is happening, start to collect bottles to store your beer in. Many home brewers use glass bottles and buy a bottle capper and caps, but today we're going to be upcycling plastic bottles, which is something we all have easy access to.
Collect as many as you need to hold 3 gallons of beer. Clean and sanitize them thoroughly, just as you did the equipment on brew day. The day before bottling, move the fermenter to a countertop so gravity can assist us in the bottling process. Allow the fermenter to sit overnight to let any sediment settle that might have been kicked up when it was moved. On bottling day, bring 1 cup of water to a boil and stir in 2.5 ounces of corn sugar. Boil for 5 to 10 minutes and then allow it to cool. This is our priming sugar, which the yeast will convert into CO2, and because our bottles are sealed airtight, the CO2 will dissolve into the beer, causing carbonation. It is important not to use too much sugar, as it can cause overcarbonation and exploding bottles. Now, take the foil off your fermenter and add in your sugar water. Take your clean and sanitized spoon and begin stirring gently, taking care to avoid splashing and not rile up the sediment. If you do rile up the sediment, that's okay, just let it sit for a bit. Next, take your clean and sanitized bottling wand and attach it to the end of our clean and sanitized tubing. Running the tube under hot water can help attach them. Now, fill up the tube completely with water. You will have to press down the end of the bottling wand to allow water to flow in. We will be using the water in the tube to create a siphon that will allow us to pull beer out of the fermenter and flow into bottles. The water in the tube will start a siphon that will move the beer in the fermenter into our bottles. With the tubing full, place the bottling wand end into a clean and sanitized pitcher and the other end of the tubing into the bottling bucket. Push down on the wand to start the flow. Keep the flow going until all the water is emptied out of the tube and is replaced with beer. Once the tubing is full of beer, move the bottling wand to one of your clean and sanitized plastic bottles and fill it to the very top. When you remove the bottling wand, it will leave just enough headspace. After you've filled your bottles, seal them with sanitized caps. With all of our beer in bottles, we'll now wait 1 to 2 weeks for the yeast to go back to work and carbonate our beer. Stick them back in the area where you fermented, or slightly warmer if possible. One of the benefits of using plastic bottles is that we can do a squeeze test to gauge carbonation. On bottling day, give them a squeeze and notice the pressure. A week later, you'll notice it's a little more firm, and even more so 2 weeks later. This is a sign that our beer is carbonated and almost ready to drink. After 1 to 2 weeks and our bottles are feeling firm, move 1 bottle to the refrigerator and allow it to cool overnight. Then pop the top and give it a test. You should hear the pshh sound of carbonation when you open the bottle and be greeted with a nice foamy head when you pour your beer into the glass. If you feel the beer needs more carbonation, wait another few days before you test another bottle. Once it meets your expectations, it's time to enjoy. And that's it! You just learned how to make beer, so get out there and start brewing! Want to learn more about making beer and the American Homebrewers Association? Head over to homebrewersassociation.org for tons of recipes, tutorials, and more. We'll see you there. Cheers!